Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick too, and today I'll be showing you guys just how powerful Barbarian really can be. Everybody kind of memes on Barbarian, but honestly Barbarian actually has some of the highest potential out of any of the classes. With an extremely large variety of very good legendary options, as well as more legendary slots than any other class due to having 4 equipable weapons, the Barbarian has a ton of different build options and a very high ceiling for damage output, with so many legendaries powerfully scaling your damage. Out of all the builds though, my personal favorite at the moment is taking full advantage of Whirlwind, which can actually do some pretty solid boss DPS. But the main reason that I really love it is because it's probably the best AoE spell that Barbarian has, and it allows you to clear maps extremely quickly. Barbarian is a ton of fun, and it is much better than most people give it credit for, and today I'll be showing you guys the true potential of Barbarian. If you're interested in fully in-depth leveling guides, I'll be posting them for pretty much all the classes prior to Diablo 4 actually coming out, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss those. And there's also going to be gameplay at the end of the video of a full dungeon run with the build, but without further ado, let's just get into it. Before we hop into the skill tree and every single legendary that you want with the build, I first want to talk about the core of the build and really what makes it function. So Whirlwind by default is a little bit lackluster. It does only 20% of your weapon damage, pretty low, and the modifiers for it aren't insanely good. Getting an extra 30% modifier on it is decent, but other than that, it's a little bit weak by default. It does have a relatively low fury cost, but what's really good about it is that since it is a channeled skill, you can snapshot a lot of additional weapon damage bonuses so that the weapon damage bonuses last through the entire duration of Whirlwind rather than just one hit. So you can basically be spinning and taking advantage of all of this additional damage the entire time. Obviously certain builds like Upheaval can do way more damage in just one hit, but the benefit of Whirlwind is that you can stay in the Whirlwind constantly just mowing through mobs. One of the main ways that we're taking advantage of this, and the single best legendary for this build, and really what puts a build online, without this legendary I probably wouldn't try this build, is this one where each point of fury that you generate while at maximum fury grants your next core skill 8% increased damage up to 240%. This stacks up relatively quickly. Pair this with some of our shouts and some more fury generation, you get this up very quickly. And this is going to last through the entire duration of our Whirlwind. So our whole Whirlwind is going to be benefiting from a massive 240% increase in damage. Pair this with another legendary that gives us an increase to our critical strike chance while we have our Whirlwind up. Mine is only at 40%. This can go all the way up to 80%. You can have an 80% increase to your crit chance while Whirlwind is up. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff that dips into, taking advantage of that critical strike chance. But of course, if you're critting, you're doing significantly more damage. I'll get into the rest of the legendaries later, but just these two are really what makes the build so incredibly powerful. Pair this with a whole bunch of fury generation, and we're able to stay in our Whirlwind pretty much 24/7, taking full advantage of all of this additional damage and just mowing through everything. I'm also missing one of the best legendaries in the game for this build that really makes it significantly better, which we'll talk more about later. But first off, let's get into the skill tree. So when it comes to our left click ability, we need a good one because this is going to be generating fury for us. Most people like to use Frenzy with Enhanced Frenzy because this attacks faster and it has a certain synergy with one of our legendary effects. However, I found that the fury generation is a little bit slower than on Lunging Strike, and I personally like Lunging Strike more because it's going to lunge us towards enemies, and it does a decent bit more damage. But just keep in mind, this is kind of a personal preference for me, and most people seem to be using Frenzy, so if you like Frenzy, feel free to go for that. We only spend 2 points here because we really want the rest of our points later, specifically for maxing out our Whirlwind, and then getting Enhanced Whirlwind and Violent Whirlwind. This doesn't really matter all that much. And then we get Pressure Point, where our core skills have a 30% chance to make enemies vulnerable. Because our Whirlwind is hitting so many times, it has a fairly low lucky hit chance, but on bosses and a lot of the time on elites, we'll take advantage of this vulnerable application, just do 20% more damage, and we tap into another multiplier this way. Moving on, we go into Rallying Cry, one of our main skills here. This gives us a massive amount of resource generation anytime that we pop it, which is very nice for the build, so you don't have to waste a whole bunch of time sitting there left clicking, stacking up all of the fury so that you can actually go into your Whirlwind. This is pretty much mandatory for the build, and it's also going to give you Unstoppable, so you are immune to crowd control effects, so you can just pop this and then Whirlwind without having any issues. Then you want to max it out specifically so you can get the immediate 25 fury and also the additional 50% resource generation. And the extra resource generation through Rallying Cry actually works for our Enhanced Whirlwind, where we gain fury each time Whirlwind deals direct damage to an enemy, and we also get 3 fury per elite, so the extra percentage resource generation here being 60% pairs pretty nicely with the Enhanced Whirlwind. Now I personally am using Iron Skin at the moment because I'm using a legendary where I have more damage when I have a barrier activated. However, I would generally recommend people use Challenging Shout, and the reason for this is you get 40% damage reduction, and if you spec further into it, you can get 3 fury each time that you take extra damage. The problem is that right now we're super starved on skill points, so like I would probably spec into this later into the game, but right now I like Iron Skin, and it is decent for survivability because only a 14-second cooldown. Just keep in mind that I would probably play Challenging Shout later on, but there's also a legendary that pairs nicely with Challenging Shout, which again I'll talk about later. But for now, I am using Iron Skin, and I have these for free through an amulet giving me +1 to defensive skills. Next, we have 3 points into Warcry here. Warcry is really nice, going to give us an extra 15% damage while it's active for 10 seconds, which is very good. It's also going to give us Berserk. Berserk is very, very powerful, giving us 25% increased damage and also 15% increased movement speed. And if we fully max it out, we get an additional 30% increase in damage if at least 6 enemies are nearby when we pop it. So this is really good for additional damage. And we're pairing this with Booming Voice to increase the duration of our shout effects. So it makes this go up to 10 seconds, which is particularly nice, and it makes our Rallying Cry go up to 7.8 seconds. And additionally, if you're using Challenging Shout, it would increase this duration up to 10.4 seconds. We have very good uptime on our shouts, with one of our legendaries giving us cooldown reduction based on how many enemies are nearby when we use it. And shouts are absolutely mandatory for the build, not only giving us additional damage, resource generation, and also movement speed. The rest of our points, I just put 1 point into Pit Fighter, which is pretty nice for an increase in close range damage. And then I put 3 points into Wrath of the Berserker for some pretty big single target damage. If I was like leveling and just doing general dungeons, I'm not sure if I would use this. It's a very, very powerful ultimate, giving us berserking for 5 seconds anytime that we attack while the buff is active. The buff is going to last for a default of 10 seconds, and since we got these modifiers here, it's going to give us 20% increased movement speed, 30% increased fury generation, and every 50 fury that we spend, which we're going to be doing a lot during Whirlwind, is going to increase the damage bonus of Berserk by another 25%. So this is a really powerful ultimate skill. However, if I were leveling, since it's, you know, a 60-second cooldown, this is mainly used for bosses, right? So if I was leveling, I would probably try to spec into something else. Maybe I would keep Iron Skin and also get Challenging Shout. Or I would start to look into more skills such as Leap for more mobility and try to build into more things. But since we're capped at level 25, personally, right now, this is probably the best thing to use. I also put 1 point into Hamstring here. This is something that I don't see a lot of people doing, but it's basically going to enable us to apply slow, because anytime that we deal damage with our Whirlwind, since we're using a two-handed sword, it's going to apply bleed. And then with this talent point here, we're going to apply slow. This lets us take advantage of crowd control and slow multipliers, which you can get on gear. And as you can see, currently I have an extra 20% damage to crowd controlled and 50% damage to slowed. So just from one talent point, I'm gaining essentially 70% extra damage on most enemies. And this is going to be way higher, assuming that you have better gear with more multipliers on it. When it comes to the rest of the stuff that you want on your gear, damage versus close range is incredibly powerful, and damage with core skills is also very good. Otherwise, try to go for a little bit of crit, and like I mentioned, damage versus crowd controlled and damage versus slowed. When it comes to legendaries, I already mentioned the two most important ones, being the additional 240% damage and also the Whirlwind critical strike chance, which is very good. You definitely want these to be on the two-handers because they're simply just the strongest thing for the build. When it comes to other legendaries, the most important one outside of these two is one that I literally don't even have yet, if I can find it here for you guys. So it's going to be Aspect of Echoing Fury. Your shout skills generate 2 fury per second while active, but this actually goes up to 4 fury per second, and it's going to stack for each shout skill that you have. So if you're playing with all 3 shout skills, being Rallying Cry, War Cry, and Challenging Shout, you're going to get an additional 12 fury per second, and you can drastically reduce the cooldown of your shout skills by using this legendary here. Whenever you cast a shout skill, it's going to reduce the cooldown based on how many enemies are nearby for a maximum of 12 seconds, which is very, very strong. Unfortunately, I don't have that legendary, so my fury generation isn't as good, and in place of it, I have this rather weak one, which gives me 2 fury anytime I crowd control an enemy, and anytime we apply slow, this actually counts as a crowd control, so I'm getting 2 fury pretty much every time I hit an enemy, which, you know, isn't too bad. In terms of other things that you want extra damage to enemies while you have a barrier active. This is nice because I'm using Iron Skin, so I get this 30% up pretty frequently, as well as the barrier on my pants here. Another incredibly powerful one for extra damage is attacking enemies with a basic skill increases the damage of your next core skill. Since we have to attack enemies with our basic skill to generate fury for our main legendary to work, I really wish they had names so I could refer to them by names. But since we have to attack anyways, this is pretty nice for an extra 50% damage, and I do believe it snapshots once you start your Whirlwind, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Another best one, which I put on the amulet, is skills do increase damage based on how much available resource there is. This is much better if you have more Fury generation, because the more Fury generation, the more Fury you're going to have overall, therefore the more damage that your Whirlwind is going to do with this legendary. To round out the build, I have Whirlwind periodically pulls in enemies. This is very good because it's basically going to stun enemies in their tracks and just pull them towards you, so it's going to cancel all of their abilities. That's really nice. I have movement speed, and every time that we get a crit, so I just have, more movement speed. Very nice for the build because you're really, really slow when you're in Whirlwind. After that, I have ideal 50% increased damage to unstoppable enemies for just more boss DPS. And another one that is very, very powerful, sorry that I forgot to mention this one. Damaging an enemy with a core skill has a 30% chance to extend the duration of Berserking. Berserking is what gives us an extra 25% increased damage and 15% increased movement speed, but if you crit, it actually doubles the duration. So you have a very high chance of extending the duration of Berserking. So while you're in Whirlwind, as long as you're hitting enemies, you're going to be extending the duration of this Berserking, giving you extra damage and also increasing the movement speed, which really just makes the build much more fluid to play with. As you can tell, the build, there's like a lot of moving pieces, and a lot of these legendaries really make it all that much better. Obviously, it's very optimized for level 25. Obviously, we're going to be strong because we're level 25, but this is the main benefit of Barbarian, is that you have so many different legendary options and they all work really, really well together. So that's why it's not really fair to compare Barbarian to other classes when Barbarians don't have that many legendaries. But honestly, you could really only have like 4 or 5 of these and the build would be really good. You'd just be missing out on some quality of life stuff, such as mobility. The barrier is pretty overkill. Like, you already one-shot elites. A lot of this optimization is really just for melting bosses. Now I just want to show you guys some gameplay of the build. One thing that is incredibly important to mention is your main source of damage is through this legendary, giving you the 240% increase to your core skill damage, which you can see on the bottom left here. So the most important thing with this build is immediately engaging, using Rallying Cry for this additional resource generation, using our left click to stack up our Fury, and then making sure that before we press Whirlwind, we have this buff active. You can also make sure that you at least press your basic skill 5 times, if you do have this on a one-hander, to get the additional 50% damage for your Whirlwind as well. Anytime that you're in Whirlwind and you have this buff active, if you press Warcry or literally any other ability while you're Whirlwinding, it's going to cancel the snapshot. So never press anything while you're Whirlwinding unless you intend on canceling the Whirlwind, because it's going to do literally no damage. One thing that's also very important to note while playing with this build is you don't want to just sit there and spam your left click and try to kill every tiny mob that you see. Like, if I wasted a Whirlwind cast on these guys, it wouldn't be good. I'd be slow, right? This is why I like Lunging Strike, because I can generate a lot of my Fury just moving through, and these guys are going to follow me. And now that I'm now that I'm next to an elite, I can pop my additional resource generation, I can pop my other shouts, and everything's going to just come funneling into me, and I can just melt it all in the matter of seconds. Now I can cancel my Whirlwind. I nearly have full rage, and I'm just going to keep going on. I almost have my shout back up, but I'm just going to wait until I get to another elite. I'm not even popping my ult or anything. Now that I'm at another elite, I'm going to pop both of my shouts. And then I can just melt everything again. And you pretty much just want to cycle like this. The more mobs, the better. Like, if there's way more enemies, the build just performs a lot better overall. So now there's a lot of guys. I'm going to pop my ult, pop both my shouts. And once everything comes in, they just get completely nuked. If there's, like, the more enemies that there are, I could just, like, infinitely spin pretty much. But when there stops being enemies, you stop being able to increase the duration of your Berserking. And since Whirlwind does generate Fury while it hits enemies, it's nice having a lot of enemies to hit, obviously. But as you can see, is if you make sure to just Lunging Strike in between packs, you can actually build up that Fury without, like, wasting time. And you're using this as mobility. This is why I like Lunging Strike versus Flurry, because I feel like you just waste less time with the build, and you can just generate your Fury faster and get your 240 stacks much faster. So here's another good example of that. Everything stacked up, gonna pop all my shouts and just mow through all the mobs. The main downside of the build is that you're kind of just slow running around, and that's kind of just how it is. I didn't get enough anima somehow. I had to run back and get some anima, but like I was saying, the main downside of this build is that you're a little bit slow, which is why it's really nice to have the movement speed on crit on the boots. But I think as you level up, you're able to spend more points getting some cooldown reduction and some other things, which enables higher uptime on Berserking, which is a pretty good movement speed buff. And there's also some movement speed that you can spec into in the skill tree. So I think once we're in endgame, the movement speed issue is going to be a non-problem. And I think at some point, Elite build might actually be really good. Even pairing with this build, I don't think it would be all that bad. So I think the movement speed thing probably eventually won't really be all that big of a deal. Right now, it certainly doesn't feel good when like Rogue is just like flying through the map. Sork just one-shots everything anyway, so it just feels a lot better. Even though teleport's really good, but it's not like, you know, insane mobility. You're not like flying across the map. But yeah, because I have the Blast Wave Drive, I'm just gonna walk through all these guys and get to the objective here. I just won't. It's movement speed. I'll get it. Where's the objective, bro? There it is. I already ran past it earlier, I think. Get that. Pop our shouts, and we can just mow through some dudes. GG. I really just want to get to the boss. And try to nuke the boss. I don't think this place has a boss, does it? Whatever. One thing that the build isn't particularly good at is moments like this where enemies are like spawning, but I kind of just like to wait till a good amount of them are spawned. And then once they're all spawned, try to mow them down, and hopefully they trickle in fast enough. If they don't trickle in fast enough, you may have a period of time where you have to, you know, generate some more. But generally, it's fine. Not a big deal, right? Mow everything down. No big deal. And then I think this is a boss guy. He'll generate real quickly, and then just start whirlwinding, and GG. That's pretty much it. Hopefully you guys did enjoy. If you did, please make sure to drop a like and subscribe for videos similar to this one. We're making a ton of Diablo 4 content. Super hyped for the game, and I hope you guys are as well. Peace.